Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, aka Caliban, and I say, don't knock masturbation, it's umox with someone you love. I'm joined on this episode by Michael Swaim. Michael is a Webby and Streamy Award-winning actor, writer, comedian, and podcaster. He's the co-creator and head of the Small Beans Network, which creates podcast, video, comedy, and more. And he's a manager of video programming at IGN.com. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, Aaron. Thanks so much. I'm also a self-loathing masturbator, so I defeat your thesis right there.
You're in good company.
You do not have to love someone to do human umox, I think they call it.
Hateful umox, yeah. Just bitter.
The beast with one back.
Well, it's great to have you on the show. Permission to come aboard granted. Today we'll be talking about Bar Association, the 16th episode of the 4th season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains, is a quotation from the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels that admonishes the proletariat to organize against the depredations of the capitalist system and to unite against class struggle, regardless of one's race or nationality. It's a strange thing to come out of the mouth of a Ferengi, but it's also perhaps a stranger thing to hear on an episode of Star Trek. In the decades since its premiere, Star Trek has become the example of a future utopia where the ravages of exploitative commerce have been curtailed. But Trek is tellingly light on discussions of economic theory, and the majority of its criticism of capitalism is limited to not being able to pay for pizza. Gene Roddenberry wanted to see a world where humanity was free from oppression, but you have to wonder what Gene would think about one of his creations quoting the fathers of communism. From Captain Kirk reading the Declaration of Independence to Star Trek Discovery name-dropping Elon Musk, Trek has always been fundamentally American and capitalist, and it remains to be seen if progressive sci-fi can write to the strength of its convictions and truly lose its chains. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. First, Michael, it's great to have you on the podcast. I always ask first-time guests to the show how they first discovered Star Trek. How did you become a Star Trek fan?
Oh, well, great question. My dad sat me down, as all good parents should, and told me this is a show of import, son, because this bald man will say many wise things. And you don't know if I mean DS9 or TNG, haha.
Right.
But, it was TNG at the time. I've seen my father cry only a handful of times in my life. Once was when we were in a near fatal car accident, and I woke up in the ambulance, and he was like, "You're going to be okay, son," tears streaming down his face. The other one was All Good Things.
Yes.
So, highly vaunted programming in my household, but I will say you caught me at the perfect time because I just sort of have had like a rebirth of the relationship with these programs. The core three to me being TNG, Voyager, and DS9. And I, for the first time as an adult with a fully formed brain, sat down and watched them in order, not passively paying attention, comparing them, sort of analyzing the differences between the structures of the show, of the shows, and man, I fell in love all over again, and I'm obsessed right now. My partner who couldn't care less about Star Trek, is starting to get annoyed, but at the same time, just through osmosis, we'll be like, we'll hear something and be like, that's not what Janeway would say. And I'm like, very good. That is an out-of-character Janeway line. Because Janeway's a utilitarianist. She wouldn't take this into account.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm in love with it. I'm foisting it into all the content I make, and I'm foisting it onto all my loved ones. So it's peak Trek right now.
That's fantastic. It is interesting that it has appeal, obviously, to young people and old people and families and everyone alike. But I did the same thing, grew up on it, and didn't really notice, like a lot of children's and young person's entertainment has, moralizing didactic elements.
Sure.
And never really realizing or thinking that was weird when I was a kid. That's what, entertainment was. It tells you what to do, what not to do. And then I became an adult and learned about all these ideas that happen in Trek and thought, oh, wow, I'm glad I grew up watching this and not like Sons of Anarchy or something. Like as a kid, I might have turned out a lot differently. But yeah, it's just rediscovering it as an adult has been really great for me as well.
Especially when you hear about people younger than us who have to watch out for like YouTube algorithm recommendation holes where they suddenly get wild stuff normalized that is just out of left field. And I feel like there's so much more to contend with. So yeah. The only things around to corrupt us were like early South Park and punk music, I guess, you know?
Yeah.
Damn it.
And finding a penthouse in the woods or something.
That's right.
That.
That's a classic trope that never happened to me. I feel cheated by that. But yeah.
Me
Or what
either.
was damn it was the song. Dude Ranch was the Blink 182 is the band I'm thinking of. I mean, their song name was a swear. That was huge for me. That was a big deal.
Well, speaking of funny things, the real question is, how did you get started in comedy?
Oh boy, failing at all the broad leading man and or dramatic like possibilities in terms of writing and performing.
You're so tall, though. How could you not get a leading man role?
It's interesting you should say that.
You wear lifts.
I do wear lifts because my knees are crap and I have flat feet, so I have a like half-inch prosthetic. So not for vanity reasons, but no, I had a very like crystallizing moment for me was an audition where a director had a very strong emotional reaction to my read during the audition. I went away thinking I nailed it, was bewildered to find out that I didn't get the part. And it was the college environment, so it's a professor. So I had the temerity to be like, hey, what's up with that? Which you don't do because it's just their business. But they were kind enough to say, and maybe they were blowing smoke up my ass, but they were like, that really, you nailed the intention and contrast and playing opposites and everything, but you're straight up too tall. Everyone else we cast in the core cast is like a full foot shorter than you, and it would just look weird. And young man, just so you know, that is the harsh reality of like the world you're going into. When you're on my side, you will do that. Because you want the audience to experience what you want the audience to experience. And I was like, that's bullshit. I'll only cast based on merit. And I immediately, of course, started casting based on vibe and look. Someone walks in the room, you're like, that's a funny guy. That's a funny face. We'll cast him. It's just what happens. So, you know, it's a harsh world. But in that world, comedy is sort of a byway that anyone can go into. Look at goddamn Tim Robinson. For proof of that, like just a weird looking dude. It doesn't matter as much about your body shape. It just matters if you have the jokes and they make people laugh. And that was very appealing to me. So as early as college, I was editor-in-chief of the satire paper there and started doing sketch reviews and writing just comedic plays that I would cast myself in because I couldn't get cast in anything else. Then the biggest insult of all, I graduate from this theater school and they give me the, actor of the class award in my year, which is, and my acceptance speech was like, I didn't have a single lead in any of the plays. I played, my parents and I together paid, $50,000. I thought I was going to get to be in some plays, but thank you for this.
Yeah, right.
So that was a fun time. And that, I think, gave me the sarcastic edge and crushed soul that you need for a life in comedy.
Oh, yeah. It's hard to be accepted and be in comedy like that. People, it depends on how old they are, but like listeners of a particular age are probably very familiar with Those Aren't Muskets, your sketch comedy troupe. I know I was. How did Muskets come together?
Muskets came directly at that time out of that experience. Believe it or not, there was a time on the internet where there were sketch troupes and they made sketches and released them, and those would go viral. And now that's been boiled down to TikToks, which is it's fitting that it's so similar to TikTok because that's what it feels like. Quibi was defeated, but it wasn't really defeated because they were right about what content is now. And I'm not even that butthurt about that. Time moves on. Different generations parse information differently. But content is becoming this very like undifferentiated cloud of information that you can pause and chat over and have different streams of stimuli going simultaneously. And anyway, off my old man soapbox to recall that back in the day, we were inspired by so many great internet sketch troupes that were already doing what we wanted to do, but we did get in fairly early. 2007 was our first sketch, and so we were just a hopeful little like YouTube troupe of college improv weirdos, and that troupe existed for maybe it's hazy. It overlaps with because we were fortunate enough to get acquired by Cracked, the big content brand that most people probably know me from, if they know me, and they very kindly, out of college, hired essentially our whole troupe. Anyone who was interested in pursuing comedy seriously, we just became their full-time video department with like health benefits and real jobs, which is you value even more in your 30s. Yeah. Looking back, you're like, that was nuts. I had, good health care and stuff right out of college for doing jokes. I'm not rich by any means, but I was like, if I break my leg, they'll fix it because of dick jokes. That's pretty good.
Yeah. As a sketch comedy group in those early days, and these are like early YouTube days too, is the final goal like being a hit on Funny or Die, or just trying to land hits somewhere?
That was it. Because it was being the thing of the day on Dig first, then
Dig,
and this persists to this day. So like, I'm not that ancient yet. Front page of Reddit was a viable. You wanted that. But Dig is dead. Stumble Upon, I don't think matters anymore, but you wanted to be on Stumble Upon.
No.
Featured on stuff like that. Like one of our biggest thrills was we were named Kings of Dot Comedy by G4, and that was on Real TV at the time. So we were like, hell yeah. Featured on one of our sketches featured on Tosh.0, Real TV. We were like, hell yeah. So those were the highlights. Those were the big moments. And yeah, every time you got a sketch featured on the front page of College Humor, you got a free College Humor shirt, and that was it. So I have 12 College Humor shirts that don't fit me anymore because I've gained 10 years of weight.
Sure, right, yeah. And if you'd even want to represent that brand anymore, who knows? I don't think it's hyperbole to say that, your work with both with Muskets and Cracked was instrumental in the growth of YouTube. I mean, it was all zoo videos and like old TV show clips until comedy videos and listicle and media analysis videos moved in.
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you. I think we're amongst a handful of websites that did that and did it well and did it in different ways. But I'm coming to realize that it's not overstated to say that Cracked was like a part of that. And the listicle part, well, listen, I was on the video side, and we arguably pioneered some things or had some influence or what have you on the world of video. But the listicle thing, that's huge. And Cracked really did do that. And that's not me, because I was making sketches. And honestly, I did write a lot for Cracked, but I always resisted that trend. It's just not in my nature. I'm pretty long-winded. So they gave me a column, and I would write op-eds where I got to do whatever I wanted. And when they forced me, I'd occasionally write one of the 7 reasons so-and-so was actually right. And but I can't overstate how huge that style pioneered by like Jack O'Brien and Jason Pargin and people like that. That had a huge impact on the landscape of the internet, I think, to this day. But on the video side, I like to think that we contributed to YouTube, especially after hours. I feel like I still see people doing that, which is sort of the no substitute for hard work thing. It's pop culture analysis that's fully formed, cogent theses like you would give as a college dissertation, so to speak, for adult audiences, and that's not
in 4 voices.
Yeah. But that's no longer revelatory like Red Letter Media or whoever you love. Zero Punctuation or like whoever you love. But I love to think that we were part of that. Like Jack, our editor-in-chief, always called it comedy with a college degree, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. That's good. Sure. It's a little corporate-y, but sure.
Yeah, sure.
A little corporate lingo-y.
I wanted to shout out your editing really quick. You've talked before about how you and friends have actual conversations like the ones in After Hours. And it's writing that takes those conversations from 3-hour affairs to like a tight 6 minutes. But a lot of comedy is in the edit, and your editing work on After Hours is half of the comedy as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, thank you. A big thing in my life was finding out that editing is secretly my favorite aspect of the process. It's like where the magic happens, especially for comedy. You can take a sequence of sloppy shots where actors phoned it in a wild range of performances, and if you edit it properly, still get the laugh. Like you still got there.
Right.
It has so much power and potency. It's really an undervalued part of the process. Love editing. And After Hours, I think the thing people most overlook that is the secret sauce of it that you can't really replicate without doing it, which is a pain in the ass, is the editing, because every episode had at least one supercut. Like I'm working on one right now that's for my new job at IGN, but a similar video. about Star Trek. It's the three captains of the three core series and the three different schools of ethical doctrine, like different ways of doing what's right. So I have to, as a result, watch every episode of TNG and find every time Picard uses the word duty and
Duty.
yeah, just, building a spreadsheet. That's a lot of it.
It's one of the things that kind of bugs me about video games and I think holds them back is that editing. We're out of the cutscene era of storytelling in video games, where you just watch an FMV video. But a lot of the dialogue between characters in modern games, I guess for clarity's sake, is still character A talks, character B talks, character A talks, character B talks. And you could drive a truck through a lot of the cues and it's kind of clunky. And an exception would probably be the games like AAA games where they have the motion capture performances, where it's just the actors on set, like doing stuff, and then you can just make that digital for the game. But otherwise, somebody's like, oh, no, you can't destroy the world. I must destroy the world. But you can't.
That's
I must
so
destroy
true
the world.
about the cues, and I rarely hear anyone else bring it up. Thank you. The games are not paced appropriately, and we just accept that that's the pacing of video game dialogue, but you forget how much that's hampering your experience.
Yeah, as they become more and more movie-like as well. Not that they need to be movies, but it just becomes more and more just evident. And I have a theater background as well, and so that's just like, you got to pick up those cues, to make this thing shorter, make it peppier.
Snappier. Can you code it snappier, punchier?
Yeah, come on, punch it up. Comedy's never going away on YouTube, but as far as I can tell, it seems like the dominance of the internet sketch group is over. What do you think about the current state of comedy, YouTube, TikTok, etc.?
Yeah, so my new niche, as I aforementioned, I'm at IGN, sort of the video game, and they're verging on entertainment, pop culture. Everyone who gets big enough tries to own every vertical. But nominally, most people know them as like video games, journalism, and explanatory pieces. And I'm lucky in that I have pedigree in the sketch stuff and the narrative-driven stuff, which is my favorite. My favorite stuff is like Welcome Back, Potter, Starship Icarus, which are Crack Studios productions that are like sitcoms, like they have a story and characters. That's the most fun. But I absolutely love, as I said, these like essay-ish pieces, and those still are alive and well. IGN puts out a lot of those, and they need a lot of people to make them. So I have a fine home making those, and then every once in a while, because I've made myself invaluable enough at the company, I'll make a stink and be like, if we don't do something fun and funny for April Fool's Day, then I quit. And they'll give me a small budget to do, something that harkens back to the old days of sketch, and it'll tank, and they'll be like, this is why we don't do sketches. And I'm like, leave me alone.
Yeah, right.
I'll do 25 explainer pieces this year. Just let me have this.
Do this, please.
Thing where I get to do a wacky accent or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Theater
Let me wear a beard. Watching YouTube is becoming a career. I love these like essay pieces, but they're so long. It's a lot different than just watching like Star Trek rap.
It's true.
For 5 minutes. Yeah.
There's and I'm glad to see that sketch still does get like a bubble. Like, I think You Should Leave it's interesting how you're like, it broke through the static somehow. If Bo Burnham did a sketch special, I'm sure it would get its moment. I hope he does. But by and large, I think there's a lot more about authenticity and the organic experience. And, it's sort of a natural result, speaking of Star Trek style, like futurism and trend reading. But I think it makes sense when you realize this generation that's coming up now is like steeped in all screens are everywhere, and the screen is multi-purpose. The screen brings you different streams of different sizes of different inputs of stimuli, and it could be text, sound, whatever. You could do multiple, or you can focus. It feels like it's very natural to me that there would be a huge rise in the popularity of content that's more just stream of consciousness and being present and being like with someone as they experience something for real in real time. So like, the rise of video game streaming and things like that,
Twitch
totally makes sense to me. It's just a shame that I'm not as good at it. I'll tell you when I should have been born was 1950s or come of age 1950s, writing sci-fi short stories and selling them to magazines.
Oh, sure.
You could make a living doing that. Oh, I would have killed it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you streamed some. I remember watching a stream of yours that happened around the time of when the hammer came down at Cracked.
Oh yeah,
and
Enter the
all
Gungeon
those,
stream.
Great. Yeah, the End of the Gungeon stream. Yeah, and you talked about why you left Crack and what was in your future, and it must have really affected me because I can't boot up Enter the Gungeon to this day without thinking about that stream. But so thanks for ruining Enter the
Sorry
Gungeon.
about
But
that. That's a classic game too. I'm sorry.
No, it's a great game. Have you played the?
I was going to say, can you still play Exit though? Is Exit okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Right. Yeah, no problem there. But I was just thinking about the massive talent that you had at Cracked and the resulting diaspora, and how it just was so frustrating for people sort of watching from the sidelines at the time. To me, it felt like that Hunter S. Thompson line in Fear and Loathing about, the wave finally rolling back. But all of those performers have gone on to even better things and have found their own niches and successes, yourself included.
Yeah, me less so, but I'm working on it.
Don't sell yourself
There's
short.
still time. Thank you. I've found a tremendous amount of creative fulfillment, and IGN is also fun. But Small Beans is really like where my heart is, I would say. And others of us are really killing it. Like Dan O'Brien is, of course, a Emmy winner at this point. And Robert Evans, who brought this whole new branch of sort of owned, like he was a one-man Vice, like he was our real journalism department at Cracked, and he's spun that off into, like, he's still doing what he's always done, but he spun it off into a huge podcast and other secret projects that I can't fully talk about, but like novels and tons of great stuff. Behind the Bastards is his flagship show, if you want to look for him there. But yeah, it's funny because I actually quit for the reasons I discussed and will repeat from that very long video because it's unencapsulatable. But I quit 2 or 3 weeks before a corporate person came in and was like, shut it down, shut it all down, and fired everyone. If you're unfamiliar with the industry, when we're alluding to like sketch comedy being dead, we mean big companies being willing to pay lots of money for jerk-offs to like make funny internet sketches. That was viable for a while, but it wasn't just Crack. This happened to College Humor, and this happened to The Onion, and it was just sort of a changing of the guard. Actually, Facebook was directly to blame for a lot of technical reasons, but so more Zuckerberg hate if you can muster it. As please. Bezos sails overhead in his wiener rocket.
Yes, he's looking down on us.
Thanking us. He's thanking us. We made it possible, Aaron.
He's welcome. I had Robert on the show a couple years ago, like right before Bastards really picked up, and he started, he's doing 3, 4, 5 podcasts about the horrible dystopia that we all live in now. But yeah, he loves Star Trek.
Yeah, that's also, it's interesting that he's sort of a dystopian trend watcher and an illuminator, and Star Trek is the reverse of that. And I think he's prospering off the fact that it's looking like he might be right, might bear out, or at least in some big important ways. And I saw him tweet recently a Vonnegut quote and said resonated with him very much about how he was the only person in the world that benefited from the Dresden firebombing. And I'm like, so he's really in it.
Oh my God.
Just for the record, he doesn't want all this horrible shit to happen.
No,
it's upsetting to him as well.
He wants to be left alone and shoot guns.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's his vibe.
Well, you're with IGN now, and I have to say that a lot of your stuff is very impressive, just as impressive as your Cracked work.
Oh,
I saw a video of yours from earlier in the year, and you were talking about time loops, how they're the new zombies, the new device du jour in sci-fi and pop culture. And of course, you have to do it. You do a conceit where the video keeps rewinding and starting over. But also, you tied the idea of the use of time loops to a growing sophistication in audiences via the Flynn effect and the acceleration of the phenomenon of nostalgic return. And you use the repetition not only as chapter breaks, but to reiterate some of the pretty wonky stuff that you were diving into. It was just like, it's pretty good.
Thank you. I'm really glad you saw that one because, that's, I think...
The other ones aren't as good.
No, there's this thing at IGN because... you intersect with celebrity sometimes there, which was not a thing at Cracked. So, like, I'll do this time loops piece that I spent a long time thinking deeply about, and the editing, and taking the editing reins because I want it to be correct, and it'll do decent. But a 30-second clip where I just asked John Goodman how his new movie was, and he goes, "It was fun. It was fun to do. Go see it in theaters." It's like 2 million views. And you just have to recognize that they're like different products that serve a different purpose in people's lives. But the next one that's like that is this Star Trek piece. So I know that'll be right up your alley. Yeah.
Speaking of celebrities, it seems like a million years ago, pre-pandemic times, but just before things got bad with the pandemic, the last film I saw in the theater was Bloodshot. And you got to talk with Bloodshot himself, Vin Diesel, about his love of D&D, and you made a custom D&D class for Bloodshot.
That's right. Now I have a campaign where I will sometimes summon Bloodshot by throwing like a totem on the ground, because you may as well use the character sheet, right? We spent some time developing it.
Right.
Bloodshot will just pop in.
People are like, this isn't balanced. What's this character?
Vin Diesel, super friendly, kept us waiting for 8 hours, as he's known. That's a known thing that he does. And he was very fine doing that, but comes in and is cool. I'm going to make up for it by being super friendly, right? You're meeting Vin Diesel, so you can't be that unhappy. And you're like, I guess, man. Yeah.
Well, I really want to talk more about your writing, about your feature Kill Me Now, your editing work, the Star Trek wrap, but we have to keep moving, and we need to talk about Small Beans, your podcast network. You were no stranger to podcasting before Small Beans. What made you decide to build an entirely new network?
Honestly, it was a futurism call. I had just fallen in love with podcasting as a medium. And it's cyclical in nature because it's really just radio. But the resurgence of the talk radio format was really interesting to me, and key, zero budget, because I already own audio equipment.
Sure.
So in a panic, I immediately, after leaving Cracked, launched Small Beans with as many of the folks who ended up getting laid off from Cracked as possible. And I said, let's keep this going in an audio format because that's zero budget, but let's try to do what we love to do, which are these big ticket videos. And we've had what I would call ranging success. So we've been going 3 years and change now, and I actually can point to quite a few videos. We have a life hacks as a series, family meetings a series. We briefly revived an after hours clone called Off Hours, which was very intensive to do. We have a great sketch called technically called Clitter, which is an homage to an old sketch we did, but this time it's a combination of Clue and Twitter. And that's, like a very high-end, good-looking, well-edited sketch from that would have run in the classic era, and it got 60K views, which is quite good for an era where that format is dead. So we still try to do what we can do, but ever since pandemic, it has been podcasting only. So we do our best to make the podcasts a wild ride. We've had podcasts that feature full-on, fully scripted, sketch, radio show style format. We've had, our topics range from video games to depression and addiction. So we try to keep it interesting.
You've got a big variety of shows too. Are there any pitches that you haven't done? This would be fun, but nobody's going to listen to this.
Philosophy. Both Adam Ganzer, who hosts our video game podcast, One Upsmanship, with and I are huge philosophy nerds, and I feel like episodes actually explaining just the basics of a given philosophy that week would be really interesting to me. Abe and Adam, who sort of run the podcasting network with me, don't think anyone would listen to that. They might be right. Abe predicted our dinosaur podcast wouldn't do as well as I thought, and he was right about that. No. And then specifically, bouncing off of that, I have never believed in God or an afterlife, but I'd very much like to. And Adam Ganzer used to be a pastor and is still very devout and has no trouble maintaining his faith. Okay. So I was thinking of an event podcast miniseries where he convinces me to believe in God. So that has been pitched, but not approved.
Okay. We'll look forward to that. Well, you're on a Trek podcast right now, but you also have a Trek podcast, Star Trek: The Next Futurama, which is a co-production with Gamefully Unemployed. When you talk about the parallels between Star Trek: The Next Generation and Futurama, you've been going for a while now, so you've clearly validated your premise. But what have you learned so far about the connections between Trek and Futurama?
That Futurama, in many more ways than just the episode that is literally a Trek homage, almost is a recapitulation of Star Trek with jokes, which I didn't notice my first few times through Futurama because so many of the specific details are wildly imaginative and take things in a different direction, and yet they're deconstructing the same tropes and the same sci-fi like mechanisms and sort of thought experiments that Trek covered adroitly as well, and there's nothing new under the sun. So I would argue that they do go back to classic pulp sci-fi short stories are where probably a lot of these mechanisms were first expounded. And yet Trek, because Wars doesn't even try to do this, it's more like Fables. So Trek is the repository of this thing that I hold most dear, which are just amazing speculative fiction. I love sci-fi short stories. I love, the presentation of idea like, but what if a ship fell through the event horizon of a black hole and it was capable of transmitting out? Then time would freeze from the vantage of anything that plays on science, space, nerdery to create a compelling, essentially thought experiment, which is what a lot of good speculative fiction is. And then sort of a meditation upon the philosophical ins and outs and the moral ins and outs of that. And Star Trek just nails that so hard. For my money, it's the best TV version of keeping that tradition alive. And now you see that a lot in video games as well, like Mass Effect. In all but name is also keeping a lot of those traditions alive. Halo lore, if you dig into it, is a bunch of classic sci-fi tropes. Because think about it this way, in the subset of time travel, there's only 7 or 8 things you can conceptualize as a human that time could do that make sense as a story. So they've been done before. And I just think Trek did them really well. So there's a reason to focus on that. And then Futurama taking it and deconstructing it for the purpose of making fun of it and knowing that the writing staff on Futurama are themselves real scientists with double doctorates in physics and astronomy and stuff. I just find it endlessly compelling to look at how they tackle the same topic differently. And finding the pairings is just super, super fun.
Well, you really go deep into some of the episodes on your podcast about deals with the devil. You're ostensibly talking about the TNG episode Devil's Due and the Futurama episode Hell's Other Robots. But the whole discussion just breaks down into talking about the attitude of Starfleet people to death and religion and something that I think about a lot on this show, which is whether this view of the future that we have through Trek is skewed by seeing it through the eyes solely of people in the military officers.
Right. And DS9, of course, of all 3, gives us a glimpse into a world where you're like, oh, is the Federation just a, not propaganda because it can back up a lot of its claims, but there is a propagandistic percentage or a jingoist element. It's just a set of beliefs, when you get deep into Trek and start to realize, oh, but there's a whole Klingon empire. It's just as big. The population is whatever 100 billion. They don't believe this. Or there's Ferengis and they do use money. Oh, I thought the whole universe was just the Federation has replicators, so they don't use money, but there's other means of social control. It is inarguably an imperfect thing, and that's what's so interesting is that Trek ends up trying to thread the needle and navigate these situations over and over in a way that Futurama often deconstructs, points out the deconstruction, and, they're out. That's a punchy comedy sequence.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, you have an episode where you talk about the Neutral Zone, where they're unfrozen, the 20th century human. They unfreeze Sonny Clements. He's looking for pit woofies. And you get close to an idea that I've been thinking about recently, which is everything that we think and know about the future is influenced by what we know now.
Right.
Trek is written about the future, but it's about now. And I'd love to see a Neutral Zone 2 type episode where somebody from our time, like the early 21st century, ends up in the future of Trek, and they're completely disappointed by what they see. They're like, You guys are still at war with people? Like, you've got secret agents running around, they're doing God knows what, and you're living next to cultures that are greedy and vicious and in poverty. Like, you were supposed to have all this figured out by now.
Yeah, in fact, that episode, I think, is unique in that that's one of the only times a character does point out, like, it's really, you don't have TV? Like, that didn't persist? Because it seems pretty boring without TV. You don't, like, imbibe story in a visual medium? That's weird.
Yeah.
That feels like that would maintain in some fashion. I guess the holodeck is everything, but you got to schedule that? That feels like going to a play. I feel like there would be an analogous, convenient form of home entertainment. That's not going away.
Yeah.
Especially now that we have phones, but, or, smartphones.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if I'm allowed to bring it to bar association, I don't know how.
Sure.
If with your permission, even bar association, it's so interesting to me that, and I couldn't help but pair it with the Simpsons episode, Lisa Needs Braces, dental plan, Lisa Needs Braces. Especially because there's a big scene where a character soapboxes about how they need the union. And they shout out at two characters. In The Simpsons, it's like a guy with one tooth. But in the DS9 episode, I wrote their names down. It's two Ferengi named Frul and Dremp, which are just amazing Ferengi names. But regardless, my point is, the way it's filtered through the modern lens, I think is telling, because both of them end with the resolution being, the union will disband, and our hero that we've been morally supporting, the story's been morally supporting, Rom, is going to stop trying to mess up the system, and in exchange, the system will give you a payout, essentially. Like, Quark will give Rom everything he wants, but the union has to die. The system, in the end, which they sort of gloss over in both cases. But it's interesting to me that the moral is still, you can't really beat City Hall. And I wonder if that's a function of it being a truism, or we just perceive it to be a truism that will never go out of fashion. Like, you can't stop. Or if it's just a sitcom structural thing, because normalcy has to return.
Maybe it's both. Why not both?
Sure.
Yeah. I think it is kind of both. I think that this is a fascinating episode. That only could happen on DS9 because it focuses on a side character who's not, even a main player at this point. And it deals with the Ferengi, but it's not a typical Ferengi episode where everybody's greedy and hijinks ensue. Like, it uses this character to say something new about Ferengi culture. Specifically, I think that it isn't completely innate that the Ferengi are greedy capitalists. We see that there are these checks and balances within their society that enforce this idea of avarice. And some characters like Rom, when exposed to other cultures, end up rejecting those ideas and broadening their outlooks, which, for all of my complaints about Trek, that's about as positive a message as Trek can have, I think.
And they put their money where their mouth is in one regard that has been mentioned to death, but it's always worth highlighting and appreciating, I think, which is they show the progression of the integration, but not the full assimilation of different belief structures into our own, which is how sort of philosophy and empathy works. It broadens. And so, TOS, the Klingon are the enemy. Now Worf is chill. But he does not cease to be Klingon. In fact, there are many, maybe too many plot lines about what it means to be Klingon. And then Alexander's born, and he has to find out what it means to be Klingon. But and they continue that process, of course, all the way to 7 of 9 being a full-fledged character. That's pretty cool. And I think it does mitigate some of the way the Ferengi are used initially has rightfully been called out as like, is that problematic? What are they trying to do with the Ferengi? And then I think very much so, that is not an issue in DS9 because they're core characters and we actually go deeply into their culture in a well-rounded way that is not very reminiscent of any particular Earth culture. It's like its own thing, and it's got its own vibe and details. And the fashion. Oh, Ferengi fashion. And then, of course, there's a whole arc where Moogie, I guess, leads a cultural revolution and things change as well.
Yeah. I've heard, tired is the Ferengi are supposed to be like Jewish. Wired is for the Ferengi are Americans. They're from America.
Oh,
And
interesting.
it's a criticism or a critique on that. And, it remains to be seen if we can have reformers like Moogie take care of things. Moogie bros, maybe we'll push that forward. But let me give you some facts here. We're talking about the DS9 episode Bar Association. It first aired on February 19th of 1996. And the teleplay is by Ira Stephen Bear and Robert Hewitt Wolf. And we don't need to introduce those guys. We've talked about them at length on this show. But suffice it to say, they're the longtime writers and architects of most of what happens in DS9. The story is by Barbara J. Lee and Jennifer A. Lee, who are sisters. This is Lee and Lee's only Trek credit and their only writing credit. The pitch for the story was bought to be developed as a B or a side plot for an episode, but as it developed, the writers decided it had to be a main plot. The episode is directed by LeVar Burton, who, of course, we've talked about a lot on the show. He is a very prolific director on Star Trek, having directed 29 episodes of Berman Trek, and he's directed for other shows. He recently just filmed a two-parter for NCIS New Orleans this year. The stardate for the episode is 49565, and your assignment, Michael, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of Bar Association.
Okay. I'm going to count on my hand. Here we go.
All right.
I'm trying to separate it in my head into arcs. So that's how we're going to do it. So
Sure.
Here we go.
This will be a structured synopsis.
Yeah. Worf and Jadzia argue. Worf moves to Defiant. Quark unusually mean. Rom forms Union. Union coerced by Ferengi Commerce Authority. Is that 15 or 20? That's 15. The end.
Worf got a lot of real estate in that one.
That's true. It meant a lot to me when to realize he's really here. He's going to be in DS9. It made me feel like an old friend had come home.
Yeah.
I loved it.
He hit with a bang at the start of the fourth season, but it took a while to kind of integrate him into the cast.
I also just love that I lived this all in 2020 and 2021. Like I'm watching DS9 for the first time, the pilot, and screaming like, Cisco doesn't even like Picard. That's so ballsy. Cisco hates Picard. And people are like, it's like 30 years old or whatever. But it is. It's a ballsy move.
It is.
I love that Cisco hates Picard.
And he punches Q.
Yeah. He punches Q. So great.
Well, here are some interesting facts from the memory banks about this episode, and feel free to jump in with anything you'd like to add. The original script title of the episode was The Bar Association, but Sean Parker got to them and they dropped the. The scene where Cisco is yelling at Worf and O'Brien and Bashir for getting in a fight is not based on a similar scene in The Trouble with Tribbles, as many fans speculated. Writer Ira Stephen Bear said that he based the scene on one from the 1948 John Ford film Fort Apache, where John Wayne is chastising some of his men for fighting. And, you watch DS9, you'll see a lot of homages and allusions to John Ford and cowboy films. Bear loves those. The two Nausicaan heavies that throw darts into each other for fun were played by actual professional dart players, James Lomas and Sean McConnell, which I thought, I don't know how much skill do you need to throw a dart into a guy, but nobody lost an eye that day, I guess. Rom's confession of self-umox represents the first and possibly only reference to masturbation in the Star Trek canon. And when he asks Leela if she can ask Bashir if he'd let her help, it's also probably the first allusion to polyamory in the canon.
Yeah, and I completely regret not using my leftover 7 or whatever words to say O'Brien and Bashir do Braveheart, because that's an arc as well.
Yeah, right.
And O'Brien has cyst, or was that? I might be conflating with another episode. Or no,
cyst cured.
Yeah, cyst cured. But yeah, something that I do want to point out about the episode itself that I think is worth noting is and I don't know if I'd call it wonky, but it's something that shows often do when you take a side plot or you take a character from an ensemble piece and you say, we're going to do the Most Sislak episode finally, so we're doing Quark, and we're not just doing Quark, we're doing Rom, and America's going to love Rom. We got to make that happen. I find that you almost start from scratch and you do a little movie starring Rom and you make people take the roles that they need to take. But something that I feel weird about when I watch this is Quark this mean? Quark seems like legitimately a bad guy in this episode, which they always ride the line on so well. And I think it's just, it's functional. It's to make Rom the hero for once. But Rom is also weirdly... For example, we've seen this guy been unable to ask a woman who he knows is into him out, to the degree that he's doing comical, like, I'll be by to fix your replicator at 9. And I gotta go. And he's asking this girl, ask your boyfriend if you could rub my ears erotically, in a very glib way. Are you sorry enough to help? To do something about it.
Yeah, he shoots a shot.
He really takes a shot. I just feel like they're a little fast and loose with the characters, despite the fact that I find it a strong episode, especially the acting between the brothers. And it's interesting that it was written by sisters because it's all foils. It's O'Brien and Bashir, Quark and Rom, Jadzia and Worf. It's like they're all about the dynamic between two people who have no relation to the other stuff going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a hell of an episode. We talked earlier about why you chose it, why we're talking about it, but I can't imagine a better time to be talking about this episode, a time post-pandemic where there's a quote-unquote labor shortage, aka workers are realizing that their power resides in their labor and they don't want to go broke flipping burgers for no benefits. And we live in a time where Amazon has over 1 million domestic employees. 1 out of every 169 workers works for Amazon. Now with a basic minimum wage. And
there's a chip shortage. So the crazy dream of we'll make robots that do all of this is not materializing the way the billionaire class thought it would. Yeah.
No. And the episode opens with Rom essentially collapsing on the job because he doesn't have any sick time. I mean, they probably cut the scene where he had to pee in a bottle because he doesn't have bathroom breaks in his contract, but we can take it as stated, I think.
And I'm going to assume that that's Cookie Monster rules. Like that foam just poured in and out of some sort of rubber concavity, right? That's how the ears work.
Yeah.
So we'll never know what juice that was, but it looked good.
The costumes are great, and it always surprises me when they actually get, blood or spaghetti or something on one. You think like, oh, okay, that's a dry cleaning bill, but they're committing to the bit.
Also, the chutzpah to do a full-on like Ferengi crowd work, because every actor who takes on the role of a Ferengi needs to find out their own technique for getting around the teeth and how to sound around the teeth. There's one guy who's like goes the gruff route, like the FCA will have us all killed. I really appreciated that. And of course, Brunt, I just recently had my mind blown knowing that Brunt is also Wei-Yun, but Brunt's voice is so unique. Like every actor has a different technique for the Ferengi teeth voice combo, and I am here for all of them. It's just phenomenal. But it was ballsy, I think, to put this on the MUAs and to put this on the actors, and they all rise to the occasion admirably.
Oh yeah, just like all the actors in this are really great, and they're almost all characters who were literally hired for like one show, and the producers just went, "Oh my God, like we need to get these people here on a regular basis. Write a character for this person, write a new plot line for this person."
Yeah.
I talked to Armin Shimmerman a while ago, and he said specifically, like the ears, the hat, the makeup, everything, it's the teeth. When he puts the teeth in, that's when he starts to feel like Quark and starts to talk and act like him. Yeah. I think there's some practical questions about the Federation's economy that we can ask. Like we can take it as granted, I guess, that they don't have money, but they must have some medium of exchange. Like what do they use when they're dealing with societies who do have money? How do they purchase things from them? At the end of the episode, Rom gets a job. Does the Federation pay Rom? Does he get a check? He's not a Federation citizen.
Right. He's based in a culture where they do exchange goods for services. So shouldn't he expect to go home with some? Or I would imagine it's like Scientology, that you've opted into a lifestyle, right? If you become a member. But that also has these weird overtones that I never realized, that opting into being a citizen of the Federation is actually opting into this entire social contract. But our social contract, or in the broadest sense, our social contract of like, all right, we'll all pretend that paper is valuable because it represents stuff that would be hard to carry around. Everyone in the world does that. The social contract is maintained globally, like as long as you're within the atmospheric envelope. But you could opt out of the Federation and opt into Ferengi culture. I forget. I think the Ferengi population, like universal population, is in the trillions or something. So that's certainly a big enough society to assimilate you if you want to accept all of their cultural strictures. And that's just interesting to me because TNG really makes it seem like the Federation is the normal right way to live, and there's aberrations like, oh, these guys haven't met the Federation yet, or these Shellyak, they're made of floating rocks or whatever, so you can't really worry about them. But for the most part, everyone wants to be in the Federation. It's just a question of when we'll get the paperwork processed and get them their replicators, because everyone, wouldn't you want to live post-need? But then, of course, they don't get into the minutia of, I don't understand how certain jobs are incentivized in the Federation.
We set all your money on fire and all your possessions, and then you're in the Fed. That's you getting jumped into the Federation.
Yeah,
and like I'm sure you could like defect from the Federation to the Ferengi Alliance. You have to open a credit line, and so you just start in the hole, and then you can just keep borrowing from there.
Yeah, this is a culture where I think you have to like put coins into a slot to talk to the Grand Nagus. So you're not starting at zero. There's no way. It's going to be indentured servitude of some kind. Yeah.
I'm fascinated / horrified at how nonchalant Federation's characters are as to what's going on in the episode. You know, Bashir almost flippantly tells Rom he should start a union at the beginning. But does Bashir know of unions? Are unions required in the Federation? Or is it just something that he recognizes as being necessary in this archaic economic construct of capitalism?
Also, was that the idea germ? Was that like no one in the Ferengi Alliance was aware of the concept of like collectivist action until then?
I think they would never even, because it's like punishable by like pain and death, apparently. Like it's just bred out of them.
Then they must be aware of it. So it's just like Rom having his memory jogged, like, I could do my society's equivalent of like treason. I could do treason. That's true.
Do a treason.
I didn't think, I mean, he's a doctor. I guess I'll do it. But it's interesting that Bashir, puts him over the line towards that course of action. In a later scene, hears that happened, and it's like, oh, really? I'm mildly surprised. I was just sort of talking, but sure.
Okay. And then he's still just like, oh, okay, your brother got beat up? Great. Okay.
Yeah, let's note that this results in an injury so severe that I think in our time it would be, it could be put you in critical condition. It's only the fact that they live in the 24th century that makes it, we slap these lights on your bulbous head and it fits together. But I mean, it's bad. In fact, a DS9 line, the delivery of which lives in my head rent free, is, of course I'm scared of them. They crushed my eye socket. It's like such a good Armin Shimmerman delivery. But crushing your eye socket, that's, the Nausicaans weren't faffing about, so.
No.
And the way Bashir takes it, I think, is very like bemused. He's like, I got this whole thing going with O'Brien and Worf. I have other things to attend to, but
I've got a holodeck appointment.
And I mean, this episode digs heavily into the FCA, and they handle it in an interesting way because the FCA send like enforcers, and yet
Pinkertons.
People say, Rom, I think, says to Brunt, but you can't like do that. We're not on Ferenginar. So that implies that there are jurisdictions. And as we know, DS9 is like a multitude of overlapping claims of jurisdiction. So like there's no way to get into what is the legal. I mean, it's just have Odo come and crack some skulls and do what's right. But I wonder what laws are in play when it comes to forming a union aboard DS9 that the Federation, I guess, honors.
I guess, like, how does the Federation act when they're not at home? Like, I wonder if there's an economic component to the Prime Directive as well. Like, we can't interfere with the economy of a society if they haven't given up capitalism like us. Because we see in the episode that Sisko is nominally supportive of the strike, in that he, kind of pressures Quark to make a deal so it's over with, and he tells Odo to stay out of it unless it gets violent. But you think that the Federation would then have some pamphlets about this or a training video or something, turn the chair around. So you're tired of wage slavery. Here's what to do next.
Yeah, at least some... I'm an AA member, and in AA you say not recommendation, but like attraction through. If someone seems interested, or someone's struggling, you can offer. It seems like the Starfleet doesn't even do outreach, except to Bajorans, who they desperately want to get into the fold. Or it's not geopolitical. I don't know what you would call it. Astropolitical reasons, which again, and DS9 is not afraid to do this, paints the Federation as just one political entity among many with its own self-interest.
Yes.
Which is not what I thought we were doing here. It's very interesting.
There's I've talked to a lot of people about Star Trek, and there's a lot of different kind of opinions on that. And I think there are some people, mostly leftists, and I'm not pointing fingers, I consider myself a leftist, that put all of our hopes and dreams about what we want to see in our world into Star Trek. So we think of the Federation as being the all-caring, mothering...
What if Bernie won?
Yeah, what if Bernie won? Liberal space future. Right, yeah. But I think the reality is, and it's interesting that we're starting to see this, I think, in new CBS Trek shows in the future, like Picard, that, it's just another thing. Sure, they don't start wars if they don't have to. Nobody's in crippling debt, but also they're kind of like, okay, we got problems. Like, oh, you're aliens that need help. Okay, we'll put you on the list. We'll get around to you. Like, not everything it's not heaven. It's not space heaven.
Right, and therefore it's legitimately valid for the Ferengi to say, you can do that. We have replicators, but we like the incentive that the financial and the structure that the financial system provides. We choose to do it anyway. And of course, because it's practical, we use as our currency something that can't be replicated, which is some deep lore thing they threw in. Yeah. That's why it's Latinum. So I buy all that. It just hurts, and it's the pain of growing up and realizing that things are not as simple as at first they appeared. And I love that about Star Trek. I actually love that it grew up with me and matured with me, and it fed me a bitter disappointment, because that's also life.
Jeez, just end it right there. I think it's fascinating that one of the Ferengi in the episode says, they're talking about exploitation. He's like, we know, we want to be the exploiters. Like, that's the goal of Ferengi society.
Very human.
And that's something you hear a lot, in modern discourse, about how people can't give up on the idea of capitalism, and they don't want to tax or censure rich people because they think they're going to be rich one day. Yeah. And that's the sort of big deception that keeps the whole thing going.
I mean, I wouldn't be a good Star Trek The Next Futurama host if I didn't quote Philip J. Fry and say, people like me better watch out when I get where I want to be, because then they better watch their step. I'm paraphrasing, but it definitely shows up in Futurama as well.
Big shocker, Odo doesn't like the strike. I've seen a lot of criticism from leftist Star Trek fans about Odo's character and allegiances, but he's at least committed to protecting freedom of expression. But you do get the feeling that he is certainly enjoying Quark being disenfranchised by this
but
situation.
He says, I don't like mobs, period. I don't care what they stand for. He's lawful neutral. Like, I think in our modern context, he would be saying, look, Black Lives Matter and all, but do they need to break shop windows? And I've gotten to the point in my life where I understand the violence is never the answer. I understand where you're coming from, but I say, they do actually need to break shop windows. Totally a matter for debate. Although, to quote Data in the episode Pen Pals, Black Americans are not a matter of philosophical debate. They are a people. But but regardless, I forget where I was going with that. I said I was off the old man soapbox and then got back on it. My point is just, I think Odo would be a hashtag All Lives Matter guy. And you know what? Yeah. He's a liquid. He's contending with a lot, so you got to meet him where he's at in his journey. I don't know.
Yeah, I wish that he would take the shape of this container, though. He seems to be a very rigid guy for being so
Odo
fluid.
would be like, I've known some good security officers. You know, Worf is a good security officer.
Yeah.
He might be violent sometimes, but he's a good man.
Although they do have their little tiff in this episode, I think is funny. You know, the security officer from the Enterprise.
Yeah.
And then the security officer of this backwater station is like, oh, you're not so great. Here's item number 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, it's almost a clip show but by reference, which I did really
Yeah.
appreciate. One of the rare winks where he's like, security wasn't this lax on the Enterprise. And he's like, remember the episode where this happened? Remember the episode where this happened?
Yeah.
It's great. Another parallel that just struck me this time is, and it matters for a while, they lose their commerce license, Quark and Rom, which I think gets reinstated at a certain point, and it sort of reminded me of Worf briefly losing his honor and then getting that back. They like that status, you know, a character in the party has a status affliction and then gets lifted. Is very Star Trek.
And what's cool about Trek, I think, is that it takes those things seriously. Like, it's important. Yeah, you could just say, Worf, who cares? You get free ice cream sundaes and you're on the Enterprise D, but it's important that he can relate to his brother and he can honor his father's name. And it's important that Quark gets his bar. You know, he likes to run his bar. When they shut him down, everybody in the station brings all their crap in and helps him, you know, rebuild it because that's what he wants to do.
And of course, stuff having stakes and mattering and consequences feeling real, even though this is all fake. Drama is where it's at, and that's I think the most illuminating about doing the show, comparing the drama to the comedy, because when they occasionally arrive at the same conclusion, it's devastating, because to me it means the smartest, most imaginative minds that I admire in this world haven't cracked it. For example, both the Star Trek episode about pollution and the Futurama episode about pollution end with kicking the can down the road, hoping someone in the future thinks of a better way to do something, because otherwise we're all doomed.
Yeah.
But they don't have a solution, and that's feasible. They're like, well, I mean, if we all stopped polluting, but we won't. So we don't know what will happen. Futurama makes it a joke. Star Trek makes it a solemn Geordi line.
Yeah.
Ooh, it bugs me that they both came to that conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough questions. On that topic, you know, people either love or hate for many reasons. Many young people and some old ones today are more comfortable questioning capitalism, you know, and the sort of neoliberal agenda that America's followed for a long time. And in sci-fi circles, people look to the example of the Federation as a guide, even though Trek is hardly a text for curing late-stage capitalism. Do you think that can will stop eventually, or even soon in fiction, that we'll see those ideas become more manifest in Trek on TV?
I mean, the obvious example that comes to mind is it feels like the incorporation of a non-binary way of thinking about gender expression is so real now that it will exist in the future. So now I imagine, like, if I were building a speculative fiction, like galactic society thing, I would find it odd not to have non-binary characters or characters who represent transgender expression.
Yeah.
And I bet there's a lot of stuff like that. I mean, they replicate meat rather than killing animals, but
yeah, that's true.
I'm sure once we have I suspect once we have the luxury, technological luxury of not having to kill animals for protein, we probably will stop, and we will look back at 500 years ago and go, that was barbaric. They would actually make its consciousness cease and then rip into its flesh and eat that.
Gee, when you say it like that.
We just press this button and the thing comes out.
Yeah.
It was never conscious. I think that will be it's nice if you can do it that way. That's great. Future that I'm seemingly suspect of. But yeah, I do think you're right that speculative fiction, it has a wild ability to predict the future more often than you think it will. For example, the whole idea of a tricorder itself, or the whole idea of a pad. I mean, Star Trek and Jules Verne before it predicted so many things that came to fruition, and that's so exciting about it. But you have to take with it that the nature of speculative fiction is that they're guessing 1,000 things that are as wild as they can imagine. They can imagine. That means it's through the lens of what they can imagine as a product of their time. Yeah. And it means most of their guesses will be crazy nonsense. That's totally wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's just fun. I don't know why this is the first thing that came to mind, but that Woody Allen orb where you touch it and you orgasm. I guess because I'm a comedian.
Yeah, from Sleeper. Yeah.
That's what my skills are honed to.
I started the show with a Woody Allen joke, so
I think that was knocking around. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one thing to imagine like a tablet computer or something like that, but I mean, we all know what we need to do, I think, to get things on track, at least the people that are paying attention. And I hope, I don't know, I wonder if it's too baked into the DNA, its creation, in the 60s, in the aftermath of Camelot and the status quo of American life. Roddenberry would have loved Elon Musk, I think. And I wonder if we need some new paradigm shift in Star Trek storytelling to get out of that rut.
Even Voyager, which premiered in 94 or 95. Mm-hmm. They get Tom Paris from a penal colony.
Yeah, what are they doing?
I was like, how have we not gotten to the point where there's... so if you break it down to its fundamental essence, it's that someone's behaving in a way that's so disruptive to the palette of behaviors we regularly see that they're a danger to themselves or others. If we can address it somehow and they stop exhibiting that behavior, that's the best way. But let's say they don't. The best thing we've thought of is put them in a box over there. I can't imagine that by the 24th century we won't have a better system than put them in a box over there. Yeah. It's crazy that penal colonies exist, and I actually do think it begins to feel dated.
That's
when you look
thing.
At the defund the police and the abolish prison movement.
Oh, well, yeah. Roddenberry, I don't think he loved prisons, but he did think that we would, be able to re-educate, or zap the bad things away. And that reminds me of maybe penal colonies are like leper colonies, so you have a great view from the electric needle hut, when they're curing your whatever's wrong with you.
Or I hear tell of free range prisons in Sweden where someone who was an axe murderer, they go live on a farm. There's no fence. They would just live on a working farm, and there's no reason for them to interact with anyone, and they're fine.
Just to be away from other people.
Yeah.
Interesting. I know you're a big Kurt Vonnegut guy. I guess I don't know his exact politics other than being anti-war, pro-social equality. What would or did he think about Star Trek? I don't know if he knew about Star Trek or liked it.
No, I desperately need to know that now. I have no idea. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
When worlds fail to collide.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, he was definitely around, at least for the original series, but and for TNG. But
all I know is his only film appearance was in that Rodney Dangerfield movie, which is not helpful information.
No, that's right. Interesting trivia, though.
I don't know what he... Yeah, I wonder what Vonnegut was into pop culturally.
Maybe he just loved laughing or something like that. I don't know. As we get to the end of the show here, anything that we've left unsaid, anything that you wanted to say about bar association?
I think it's really sweet and cute that Jadzia gives Worf a mixtape now that they're dating.
Yeah, that's true.
That's really cute. And I just hope that when I'm gone, someone will say at my funeral, he was more than a hero. He was a union man. That's all I got. That's all my time. Thanks so much. I'm out.
All right, Michael Swaim, everybody. Well, let's talk My Space Dad Can Beat Up Your Space Dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
Oh, that's really tough. But I think I will go Sisko because to me, the captains are an embodiment of a philosophical structure around which the show was built.
Yeah.
And DS9's my favorite. So I think Sisko's got to be my favorite.
Therefore, Sisko is the embodiment of that.
Yeah. He's the hub of the wheel, so got to pick him.
Absolutely. Now that we've reached the end of the show, you'll receive a commission and the rank of ensign. What department on the ship or the station do you work in?
I would love to be a diagnostic and repair technician junior grade on the night shift, if possible. I'm trying to meet Rom, man. What do you think this is all about? Why did we pick this episode?
It seems like a lot of cleaning jizz out of the holodecks.
And he seems to love it. He gets whatever fulfillment he gets. I just want a whiff of that.
Wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah.
Well, Ensign Swaim, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. And if people want to continue the conversation, they can at EISTPod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page. Where can people find you online?
I am most frequently found on Twitter at Swaim_Corp, C-O-R-P. It was an in-joke a long time ago at Cracked, and now my surfaceability is ruined forever. And then, as I said, where you can find all the stuff that my blood, sweat, and tears are like baked into from the very beginning, that would be over at Small Beans at patreon.com/smallbeans. And thank you so much, Aaron. This was delightful.
I know you're working on a lot of stuff. I think you're working on a novel. How's that going?
I'm working on it's appropriate we're doing a DS9 because it's, of course, famously the Western. It's the lightly Western sci-fi of the Trek family. And I am writing a fantasy novel that also is a Western, a mashup between Western and high fantasy. So,
interesting.
Lord of the Rings, but with high noon duels and stuff like that.
That sounds great. Yeah, and for comedy and takes on pop culture, check out the Small Beans Network. And I'd personally recommend One-Upsmanship, where you guys analyze video games, and also Director Piece Theater as well with Adam and Abe. They have a lot of great insights into the direction behind films, stuff that you're not going to hear in other places.
Especially if you're a fan of Cracked, they're carrying on in that tradition. They very much like we have a very casual one called Frame Rate, where we just see a movie, talk about it, like a lot of podcasts. But Director Piece is very special because they're both USC trained directors, and they will spend a lot of time developing a very real, if you were familiar with what this means or this has meaning to you, like a Cracked-esque conceptual theory about usually a popcorn movie, a movie that you normally wouldn't apply that level of scrutiny to. Yeah. And it's something of a magic trick to me because I'm not involved in its creation. So that's my favorite one too.
Well, thanks again for joining me. We're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.